My wife said she had a work meeting. Instead, I found her at a rooftop restaurant, feeding dessert to another man. I sat down at their table, picked up the wine menu, and said, "Let me guess, he's covering the bill." Let me start by saying I never expected to be the guy writing one of these stories. I've been married for 18 years. That's almost 2 decades. I thought we were a good team. We lived in Chicago, Lincoln Park. I run a small construction business. Nothing flashy, but I built it from the ground up. She worked in corporate HR management. Long hours, lots of coffee, but we made it work. Or so I thought. Things had been different lately. Nothing huge. Just small changes. Her phone always face down. More texts at night. Work dinners twice a week. She started keeping a gym bag in her trunk, even though I never saw her actually go to the gym. Little things. Things you don't want to believe. I didn't snoop. I'm not that guy. But one night, I woke up around 2 a.m., and she wasn't in bed. I walked downstairs, and she was sitting in the dark, just staring at her phone. Didn't hear me come in. When I asked what she was doing, she jumped like I'd fired a gun. Couldn't sleep, she said. Just scrolling. But she turned off her phone immediately. A few days later, she told me she had a work meeting at this rooftop restaurant in River North. Said it was with clients. Asked if I could watch her niece for the evening. I said sure, even offered to drive her. She said no, we're all meeting directly there. Here's the thing. I've done work on that building before. I know the layout. I know the valet manager. So, something in me clicked. I drove her niece to the park, but I couldn't let it go. Around 7:15, I dropped by the restaurant. Just wanted to see. I didn't plan anything. I told myself if I saw her with her coworkers, I'd walk away. No harm, no foul. But she wasn't with coworkers. She was at a corner table, candles lit, sharing dessert, feeding dessert to some guy in a slim-fit suit. I recognized him. He works in accounting at her firm. I'd seen his face at their company parties. She was laughing, touching his arm, her face all lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. The waiter came with a wine bottle. She reached for it, poured him a glass. He leaned in, close, whispered something, and she giggled. Full-on giggled. I felt my hands go numb. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I walked in like I was the one with the reservation. The hostess looked confused. I nodded and said, "It's fine. I see my party." And I walked right up to their table. My wife saw me halfway there. Her eyes widened. The guy looked up, puzzled. I pulled out the third chair, sat down calmly, picked up the wine menu, and said, "Let me guess, he's covering the bill?" The silence at that table could have broken glass. I kept my voice low, calm, but you could feel the heat in the air. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. He stammered something about not knowing you'd be here. I just looked at her. Work meeting, huh? She tried to explain. Said it was complicated. Said it wasn't what it looked like. I looked at the half-eaten tiramisu between them. Right. Just another day at the office. The waiter came by, clearly uncomfortable. I looked at him, smiled, and said, "They'll be taking care of the check. I'm just here for the wine list." I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I took a breath, stood up, and said, "I'll see you at home. Don't rush." Then I walked out. I didn't go home. I went to the lake. Just sat there in the car watching the skyline. All these buildings I helped build. Structures that will outlast me. And meanwhile, my marriage was crumbling like drywall in a flood. The next few days were quiet. She came home around 11 p.m. that night. Said she was sorry. Said it was a moment of weakness. I listened. I really did. But something in me had already started to shift. I didn't want to break things. I wanted to understand. I asked if she wanted to fix it. She said she didn't know. A week passed. Then another. She started acting normal again. Cooking dinner. Watching TV with me. But I noticed she kept locking her phone. Always on silent. Always face down. That's when I started planning. Not revenge for the sake of pain, but for clarity. For closure. I knew she wasn't done with him. I needed proof. I needed her to look me in the eye and admit it. So I called a friend of mine. He's a tech consultant. Legally, he couldn't help me track her phone, but he did help me set up a system at the house. Nothing shady, just a Wi-Fi-based tracker and a motion-activated camera for the garage and front entrance. I wanted to see who came and went when I wasn't there. I also started doing something she didn't expect, coming home early. And sure enough, one Tuesday I caught it. Her car was in the driveway at 4:30 p.m. That wasn't odd, except she had told me she'd be at the office until 6. I walked in through the back entrance. Quietly. The house was silent, but I could hear faint voices upstairs. I walked up the steps slowly, my heart pounding, but my face calm. And there, in the hallway, I heard her laugh again. The same one from the restaurant. I knocked once, then opened the bedroom door. I won't go into detail. Nothing illegal happened, and nobody was in a state of undress. But she and Mr. Slim Suit were sitting on the edge of the bed, talking close, like they were back at the rooftop. She jumped. He froze. I just nodded. Just checking if you needed anything. Carry on. And I closed the door. I walked back downstairs, grabbed my coat, and called a lawyer. After I closed the bedroom door, I didn't slam anything. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I walked down those stairs like I was carrying something fragile in my chest, because I was. I didn't go back that night. I stayed at my brother's place in Des Plaines. Told him everything. He didn't say much, just handed me a beer and turned on the Bulls game. That was enough. I called the lawyer the next morning, explained the situation, told him I wasn't looking for a war. I just wanted out with some dignity. And maybe a little justice. He asked, "Do you have proof?" I said, "I will." Back at home, she acted like the day before never happened. She made pancakes that morning, asked if I wanted coffee. I said no. She smiled like nothing was wrong, like I hadn't caught her with someone else in our bedroom. That was the moment I knew she wasn't sorry. Not really. She was just trying to ride this out. She thought if she smiled enough, cooked enough, played it cool long enough, I'd forget. But I didn't forget. I started taking mental notes. I noticed the timing. He showed up once a week, always around 4 p.m. when she was working from home, always gone before sunset. I didn't confront her. I gave her space, gave her just enough rope. I started playing my own role. I smiled. I kissed her on the cheek before work. I even left her little notes in the kitchen. Nothing crazy, just enough to make her think I was over it. She leaned into it, acted like everything was fine. That was her mistake. A week later, I told her I was going to Milwaukee for a client job. 3 days, hotel stay, full crew. She barely looked up from her phone. "Have fun," she said, and went back to scrolling. But I wasn't going to Milwaukee. I took those 3 days and stayed at my buddy Pete's garage apartment on the south side. Pete's a locksmith, has tools, cameras, a quiet place with good angles. The first night, around 4:12 p.m., her car pulled in. 4 minutes later, his did. At 6:46 p.m., they left together. Drove to the same restaurant as before. I followed, took photos, kept distance, watched them walk inside, hands brushing, bodies too close for just coworkers. The next day, I recorded them coming in again. Same time, same routine. That's when I stopped watching. I had what I needed. Now, here's where things took a turn. I met with the lawyer again, showed him the footage. He nodded slowly and said, "We can work with this." But I wasn't just thinking divorce anymore. I started looking into her company. Turns out, her little friend was married too. 3 kids. Suburban life out in Glen Ellen. Big house, nice lawn, golden retriever. I found her husband on LinkedIn. Small tech business. Real stand-up looking guy. I thought about it. Should I reach out? Should I pull him into this mess? Then something unexpected happened. My wife got promoted. Vice President of People and Culture. Suddenly, her face was on the company website. She was invited to events, charity dinners, newsletters. And right there, next to her, was him. Every time. Same smile. Same closeness. They thought they were untouchable. That's when I knew I had to hit this from another angle. She had always prided herself on her image. She loved being respected. She built her whole reputation on being the mature one. Professional. Ethical. A leader in the workplace. So I didn't shout it from the rooftops. I whispered it in the right ears. A few weeks later, I went to one of those company mixers. She thought I was out of town again. I wore a suit, walked in confidently, knew a few faces from past holiday parties. I introduced myself to the CEO, talked construction, talked family, then asked quietly, "Isn't it strange to promote someone who's having a full-blown affair with a direct report?" His smile dropped. He looked confused. "I'm sorry, who?" I pulled out my phone and showed him one single picture. One. It was from her home camera. Her letting him into the house. No coat. No briefcase. No work materials. "Just figured you should know," I said, pocketed my phone, and walked away. That was a Friday night. By Monday, she was put on leave. By Wednesday, he was removed from the accounting team. She came home furious. Said someone was spreading lies. I didn't argue. I just asked, were they lies? She couldn't answer. Then she said the one thing that made my blood run cold. "Why are you doing this to me?" To her. Like she was the one being betrayed. I said nothing. Just looked at her. She stormed out, slamming the door. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the fridge, the same fridge that used to hold our son's finger paintings. The same fridge that used to have vacation magnets, dinner notes, grocery lists. Now it held nothing but cold air and silence. Later that night, she came home quietly. I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. She stood in the doorway for a long time. I heard her whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But I didn't respond. Because I knew it wasn't over yet. The fallout at her company was just beginning. And I wasn't done collecting my share of the truth. A few days passed after her suspension, and things at the house turned oddly calm. Too calm. She was quiet. Careful. She didn't argue anymore. She cooked, cleaned, even folded my socks, which she hadn't done in years. It was like living with someone trying to erase their own guilt. Then, on a rainy Wednesday, she brought home takeout, sat across from me at the table, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "I'm sorry for everything." I didn't say anything. She continued, "We were just talking, at first. It got out of hand. It wasn't planned." I finally spoke. "How long?" Her eyes dropped. "Almost a year." I nodded. No reaction. No raised voice. Just a fact being confirmed. She reached across the table. "Can we fix this?" I pulled my hand back. I'm not the one who broke it. The next morning, she was gone before I woke up. I figured she needed space. I was wrong. I got a call from Pete around 10 a.m. Hey man, you sitting down? My heart sank. What is it? She's been talking to a lawyer. A friend of mine works at the same firm. She's trying to file first. She wants the house. I didn't say a word. My hands just gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. She was flipping the script. Even after everything, after lying, sneaking around, risking her job, she was trying to play the victim card first. Maybe she thought she could spin the story. Maybe she thought if she filed first, she'd control the narrative. That was the moment I realized she wasn't sorry. She was just trying to land on her feet before the crash. I called my lawyer. We moved fast. Filed immediately. Added the evidence. Photos, messages, camera footage. The whole thing. Here's where things turned again. About a week later, I was at a client's home, walking through a drywall repair job, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It said, "She's meeting with HR again tomorrow. You should check her email drafts." I stood there frozen. Only one person would know something like that, and only one person would still have a reason to help me. The guy's wife. Turns out, she found out too. And unlike me, she didn't wait in silence. She had confronted her husband already, kicked him out, and now she was collecting her own proof. Somewhere in that mess, she must have seen my name. She must have realized we were both on the same sinking boat. That night, I went home and sat down at the desktop computer in the guest room. It was old, dusty, barely used. But it had one thing: access to the shared network folder we used years ago for budgeting and taxes. She forgot to disable it. Inside, I found a folder labeled Temp Notes. One file caught my eye, legalstrategy.docs. I opened it. It was a draft, probably for her lawyer. It listed arguments, claims she planned to make. One of them was about emotional instability and verbal outbursts on my part. Another said I had control issues, that I had isolated her socially. She was planning to paint me as the dangerous one, the one she needed to escape. It didn't matter that none of it was true. She knew the world listens differently when a woman says those things. And I could already hear her voice in my head, soft and composed, telling a courtroom how she felt unsafe and trapped. I sat there staring at the screen, heart racing. This wasn't just about cheating anymore. It was about survival. She was trying to erase the past and rewrite it in real time. So I did something she didn't expect. I reached out to her HR director. Not with threats, not with gossip. Just a polite email saying I believed there were discrepancies in what was being shared internally, and I'd like to submit a timeline and supporting documents regarding recent events, should it be requested. No emotion, just facts. Within 24 hours, they responded. "We've reopened our internal review. Please send what you have." I did. Then something odd happened. She came home in tears. Not angry, not defensive, but broken. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking, and said, "They're letting me go." Her voice cracked. They said they couldn't have someone in leadership who's misused company property and blurred professional boundaries. I didn't respond. She looked up. "Did you do this?" I looked her dead in the eye. "No, you did." What I didn't tell her was this. One of the reasons they acted fast wasn't just the affair. It was because she'd sent company files to her personal email, trying to build her case. HR found out. The twist? The guy she had the affair with? He'd already taken a deal. He admitted to everything and kept his job, but at a lower position and in another state. He'd be relocating to Denver in 2 weeks. She didn't know. When she found out, she lost it. He said he'd stand by me, she cried. I just stood there, looking at the woman I thought I knew, watching her whole story unravel like it was never real to begin with. And in that quiet, something inside me clicked. This wasn't the end. It was just the unraveling. I had more steps to take. And she was finally starting to realize, the worst part wasn't that I'd found out. It was that I'd stayed calm. It all came to a head 2 weeks later. The house was still and cold, filled with the kind of silence that doesn't mean peace. It meant waiting. Like two people circling each other, quietly collecting reasons not to talk. She hadn't told anyone yet, not her family, not our friends. She was still pretending things might go back to normal. That we could patch this up, or that I'd somehow forget. I was sitting in the living room when her sister dropped by unexpectedly. She was carrying a tray of lasagna, smiling, saying, "Thought you two could use a dinner break." I didn't say a word, just stared at my wife. Her face drained. Her sister noticed. "What's going on?" she asked. My wife shook her head. "Nothing. Just a long week." That was it. That was the moment. Something in me snapped, not out of anger, but out of truth. The kind of truth you can't sit on anymore. I said, loud and clear, "You should probably tell her why you're not going back to work next week." Her sister blinked. "What?" My wife stood frozen, completely still. "Or do you want me to do it?" I asked. Her sister looked between us. "What are you talking about?" I stood up. Calm voice. Straight posture. Years of pain behind every word. She was in a relationship with someone from her office. It's been going on for over a year. Got caught. HR let her go last week. Her sister looked stunned. My wife started crying, right there, in the middle of the living room. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice cracking. I laughed. Just once. It wasn't mocking. It was disbelief. "That's your go-to now? After everything?" Her sister sat down, slowly, like the air had been knocked out of her. You said you were staying late for work. Every week. All those times. You lied to me too. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. Her sister shook her head. You didn't just hurt him. You used me to cover your tracks. That's when it hit her. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. She had dragged everyone in. Her family, our friends, her coworkers. And now they were watching the mask fall apart. She broke down, full on sobbing, saying she didn't know what she was thinking. That it started when she felt empty and underappreciated. That he made her feel seen. I stood in the corner, arms crossed. You were seen, I said. You were seen every day. You just stopped looking back. She looked at me, eyes red and tired. Do you want me to leave? And for the first time since all this started, I gave her a real answer. No. I want you to see what you did. Her sister left without a word. Just left the lasagna on the table and walked out, shaking her head. I don't think they've spoken since. The rest of that night was quiet. No yelling. Just breathing in a room full of things that used to mean something. She moved out 3 days later. Took half the furniture. Left her key on the counter. She didn't leave a note. I saw the guy she had the affair with once after that. At a networking event in Schaumburg. He didn't notice me. He was talking about starting fresh in Denver. I just nodded, kept walking. Our divorce went through clean. No fights over assets. She didn't push for the house after all. I think part of her still felt guilty. Or maybe she just wanted to disappear from the mess she made. The hardest part wasn't losing her. It was realizing she had been gone long before I found her at that rooftop table. People ask me if I'm bitter. I'm not. I'm tired, sure. A little guarded. But not bitter. Friends who knew us were split. Some said I should have tried harder. Others said I should have walked sooner. A few stayed out of it altogether. One of my cousins, Lisa, told me, you're stronger than you think. Most people would have lost it. You just handled it like a grown-up. I appreciated that. I still see her once in a while. Randomly. Grocery store. Bank. We nod. Sometimes she says hi. But it's like passing someone you once knew in another life. There's no fire, no pain, just emptiness. I've started dating again. Slowly. Carefully. I don't compare them to her. I just stay honest. That's the only thing I hold on to now. There's no big moral to this story. No punchline. Just this. Sometimes the person you build a life with turns out to be someone who can't hold the weight of it. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do isn't to fight for them. It's to stop fighting yourself. And walk away with your head up. That's what I did. And I sleep just fine now.